In the heart of a sprawling galaxy, where stars shimmered like scattered diamonds across an endless void, there existed a world unlike any other. The planet, known as Velora, was a breathtaking tapestry of luminous forests and crystalline oceans that caught the light of its twin suns in mesmerizing displays. It was home to a race of beings whose beauty transcended mortal comprehension. Tall, graceful creatures with skin that shimmered in hues of silver and gold, eyes that glowed softly like distant moons, and voices that could weave emotions into melodies. Among them stood their queen, Alarina, whose presence commanded reverence not merely because of her title but because of the ethereal majesty she exuded. Alarina had ruled Velora for centuries, yet her reign carried a weight few could understand. She bore scars from battles fought long before her ascension, a past marked by both triumph and loss. But none knew the truth behind one particular scar etched deep within her soul, a debt owed to someone who had once saved her life when she was still young, vulnerable, and far from the regal figure she would become. That someone was human, a species regarded by many in the galaxy as primitive and insignificant. To Alarina, however, this individual represented something far greater, an act of selflessness that defied logic and expectation. Years ago, during a diplomatic mission gone awry, Alarina's ship had crash-landed on a remote, desolate planet at the edge of explored space. Stranded and injured, she had been discovered by a lone wanderer, a man whose name she barely remembered now but whose face lingered vividly in her memory. He had risked everything to protect her, tending to her wounds and shielding her from predators until help arrived. In those days, he had shown her kindness without asking for anything in return, leaving an indelible mark on her heart. Though they parted ways under circumstances neither fully understood, Alarina vowed never to forget him or the debt she felt she owed. Now, decades later, as Velora flourished under her guidance, whispers reached her ears of sightings, a human male matching the description of her savior traveling through nearby systems. The news stirred emotions she thought long buried beneath layers of duty and time. Determination ignited within her, driving her to seek him out, not just to repay her debt but to uncover whether fate truly intended for their paths to cross again. Little did she know how profoundly this journey would challenge everything she believed about herself, her people, and the universe itself. The search began quietly, cloaked in secrecy. Alarina entrusted only her most loyal advisors with the knowledge of her quest, fearing the political ramifications should word spread that the Queen of Velora sought out a mere human. Her first step was to trace recent reports of unusual activity near trade routes frequented by humans. Spaceports teemed with life forms from every corner of the galaxy, making it challenging to distinguish one face among thousands. Yet, Alarina possessed an advantage no technology could replicate: her memory. She recalled the sharp angles of his jawline, the way his dark eyes seemed to hold galaxies within them, and the faint scar above his left eyebrow, a detail others might overlook but which she remembered vividly. Her first lead took her to Orithia Prime, a bustling hub where merchants haggled over goods ranging from rare spices to illegal tech. Disguised in plain robes to avoid drawing attention, she wandered the crowded marketplaces, her heightened senses scanning each passerby. Hours turned into days, and frustration began to gnaw at her resolve. Just as doubt crept into her mind, she spotted him, or so she thought. A man standing near a stall filled with glowing crystals turned his head, and for a fleeting moment, their eyes met. Her breath caught. Could it be? She moved closer, but before she could confirm, he disappeared into the throng of beings. Undeterred, Alarina followed the trail further, venturing into less savory corners of the galaxy. She visited shadowy cantinas where mercenaries plotted their next moves and abandoned outposts where scavengers sifted through the remnants of forgotten civilizations. Each stop brought new clues, each clue another dead end. Along the way, she encountered individuals who claimed to have seen him: a pilot who swore he'd shared a drink with a man matching his description on a derelict station, a trader who mentioned hiring someone fitting his profile to repair a damaged vessel. The pieces fit together imperfectly, like fragments of a shattered mirror reflecting glimpses of the truth but never the whole picture. As weeks stretched into months, Alarina found herself questioning not just the feasibility of finding him but also her own motivations. Was this truly about repaying a debt, or was it something deeper? Loneliness had crept into her existence long ago, masked by the responsibilities of ruling and the adoration of her subjects. Perhaps part of her yearned not just to thank him but to reconnect with the humanity he had shown her all those years ago, a quality she feared she had lost amidst the cold calculations of leadership. Yet despite the doubts and setbacks, she pressed on, driven by a quiet certainty that their paths were meant to converge once more. And then, one fateful evening, while reviewing intercepted communications aboard her sleek starship, she stumbled upon a transmission that sent a shiver down her spine. It spoke of a human operating under the alias Kale, renowned for his resourcefulness and unorthodox methods. The description matched perfectly. The scar, the piercing gaze, even the subtle cadence of his voice captured in fragmented audio recordings. For the first time since beginning her search, hope flared brightly within her chest. Kale wasn't just a name, it was a beacon guiding her forward. The transmission originated from a distant system, its coordinates pointing to a lawless region known as the Drift, a chaotic expanse where rogue factions and outcasts carved out perilous existences. Alarina wasted no time preparing for the journey. Her advisors pleaded with her to reconsider, warning of the dangers awaiting her in such treacherous territory. But she dismissed their concerns with a wave of her hand, her determination unwavering. If this was where she needed to go to find him, then so be it. As her ship entered the Drift, the atmosphere shifted palpably. The air grew heavier, charged with tension and uncertainty. Stars seemed dimmer here, obscured by swirling nebulae that cast eerie shadows across the landscape. Settlements appeared sporadically, clusters of rusting ships and makeshift shelters clinging precariously to barren asteroids. Alarina navigated cautiously, her instincts honed by years of experience. Every encounter, every exchange of information, brought her closer to Kale, or so she hoped. It wasn't long before she attracted unwanted attention. Local enforcers, suspicious of outsiders, began tailing her movements. Their motives were unclear, whether they sought to extort credits or eliminate potential threats remained uncertain, but their presence complicated matters. Alarina relied on her wits and quick reflexes to evade them, slipping through narrow alleys and hidden tunnels like a ghost. Each close call only strengthened her resolve, fueling her belief that she was nearing her goal. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she received a tip from a wary informant, a grizzled mechanic who claimed to have worked with Kale recently. According to him, Kale had taken refuge in an old mining facility on a nearby moon, laying low while repairing a damaged freighter. Alarina's heart raced as she approached the location, her pulse quickening with anticipation. She landed her ship discreetly and ventured inside, her footsteps echoing softly against the metallic walls. The facility was eerily silent, save for the hum of ancient machinery and the occasional drip of condensation. Alarina moved carefully, her senses attuned to any sign of movement. Then, rounding a corner, she froze. There he was, older, weathered by time and hardship, but unmistakably him. His back was turned, his hands busy tinkering with a piece of equipment. For a moment, she simply stared, overwhelmed by a flood of emotions she hadn't anticipated. Relief, gratitude, longing, they crashed over her like waves, threatening to pull her under. "Kale," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. At the sound of her voice, he straightened abruptly, turning to face her. Recognition dawned slowly in his eyes, followed by disbelief, then cautious curiosity. They stood there, separated by mere feet yet worlds apart, each grappling with the enormity of the moment. Neither spoke immediately, the silence between them thick with unspoken words and unresolved questions. When Kale finally broke the silence, his voice was steady but tinged with skepticism. "You've come a long way," he said, studying her intently. Alarina nodded, stepping closer. "I had to find you," she admitted, her tone laced with urgency. "After all these years." Her words trailed off, unsure how to articulate the weight of her gratitude, the depth of her longing. Kale's expression softened slightly, though his guard remained up. "Why now?" he asked, his gaze searching hers. Their initial reunion unfolded cautiously, like two strangers rediscovering familiar ground. Alarina explained her relentless search, revealing fragments of her life since their last encounter. The burdens of leadership, the isolation, the constant yearning for connection. Kale listened intently, occasionally interjecting with questions that probed deeper than surface-level curiosity. As they talked, Alarina noticed subtle changes in him, lines etched into his face by time and trials, a weariness in his posture that hadn't been there before. Yet, beneath it all, the same spark of resilience burned brightly. Despite the warmth of their conversation, a palpable tension lingered between them. Kale's demeanor oscillated between guarded skepticism and genuine interest, a reflection of the conflicting emotions roiling within him. He had spent years distancing himself from attachments, believing that solitude was safer than vulnerability. Now, faced with a woman whose life he had saved, and who clearly harbored feelings beyond gratitude, he found himself torn. Did he dare let her in again, knowing the risks? Or should he maintain the barriers he had painstakingly erected? Alarina sensed his hesitation and chose her words carefully, determined not to push too hard. Instead, she focused on bridging the gap between them, sharing stories of her struggles and triumphs as ruler of Velora. She spoke of the challenges of balancing compassion with authority, of moments when she questioned whether she was truly worthy of her crown. Through it all, Kale listened, his defenses gradually lowering as he recognized echoes of his own battles in her words. Yet, as the hours passed, cracks began to form in the fragile foundation they were building. Kale's past emerged in fragments, memories of betrayal, loss, and sacrifices made in the name of survival. He revealed how he had drifted from place to place, unable to settle anywhere for fear of forming ties that might ultimately shatter. Alarina absorbed his pain silently, her heart aching for the man who had once shown her such profound kindness. She wanted desperately to ease his burdens, to prove that trust could be rebuilt, but she knew better than to rush him. Their dialogue veered into murkier waters when Kale broached the topic of her intentions. "What do you want from me, Alarina?" he asked bluntly, his voice tinged with a mixture of frustration and vulnerability. The question caught her off guard, forcing her to confront uncertainties she had been avoiding. Was she seeking closure, redemption, or something else entirely? Her response came haltingly, layered with raw honesty. "I don't know," she admitted softly. "But I do know I can't walk away. Not again." The admission hung heavy in the air, underscoring the complexity of their bond. They were no longer the same individuals who had crossed paths years ago. Time had reshaped them, sharpened their edges, and deepened their scars. Yet, amid the tension and uncertainty, a flicker of possibility remained, a tentative hope that perhaps they could navigate this labyrinth of emotions together. As the hours stretched into days, Alarina and Kale continued to circle each other emotionally, their interactions marked by moments of connection interspersed with flashes of discord. They explored the decaying corridors of the mining facility, piecing together fragments of their pasts while navigating the ever-present undercurrent of attraction and mistrust. Alarina marveled at Kale's resourcefulness, watching as he repaired the damaged freighter with practiced ease, his hands moving with precision and purpose. In turn, Kale found himself drawn to her quiet strength, the way she carried herself with grace even in the grim surroundings of the drift. One evening, as the twin moons of the barren moon cast an otherworldly glow over the landscape, they sat together in the cockpit of Kale's ship. The hum of the engines provided a soothing backdrop to their conversation, which had shifted from guarded exchanges to something more intimate. Alarina recounted tales of Velora's luminous forests and crystalline oceans, painting vivid pictures of a world Kale had only glimpsed in fleeting memories. Her descriptions were imbued with a longing that transcended mere nostalgia. It was clear she missed her home, yet she made no move to leave, as if tethered to him by an invisible thread. Kale listened intently, his gaze fixed on her face as she spoke. He found himself captivated not just by her words but by the subtle shifts in her expression, the way her eyes softened when she described the laughter of her people or hardened when she touched upon the challenges of leadership. There was a vulnerability in her that he hadn't expected, a fragility hidden beneath her regal exterior. It unnerved him, stirring emotions he had long suppressed. He wanted to reach out, to bridge the distance between them, but fear held him back. Trust, he reminded himself, was not easily earned, nor was it freely given. Their dynamic shifted subtly during these shared moments. Alarina began to notice small gestures from Kale, a lingering glance, a hesitant touch on her arm, that hinted at a thawing of his defenses. Yet, for every step forward, there was an equal measure of resistance. When she suggested they return to Velora together, he stiffened visibly, his jaw tightening as he shook his head. "I don't belong there," he said firmly, his voice edged with unease. "Your world. It's not mine." The rejection stung, though Alarina masked it well. She understood his reluctance, but it didn't diminish the ache of hearing him dismiss the possibility outright. "Is it my world you're afraid of," she countered gently, "or the idea of letting someone in?" Her question hung in the air, unanswered, but the flicker of discomfort in his eyes told her she had struck a nerve. Despite the tension, their bond continued to evolve. One night, as they worked side by side to recalibrate the ship's navigation system, Cale surprised her by sharing a story from his childhood, a tale of running wild through the streets of a crowded human colony, dreaming of adventures beyond the stars. His voice softened as he spoke, the bitterness that often colored his words giving way to a nostalgic warmth. Alarina listened raptly, seeing glimpses of the boy he had once been beneath the hardened exterior of the man before her. In turn, she opened up about her own youth, recounting the pressures of growing into her role as queen and the loneliness that accompanied it. "Sometimes," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper, "I wonder if anyone truly sees me, or if they only see the crown." Cale's response was immediate and unexpected. "I see you," he said simply, his gaze locking onto hers. The intensity of his words took her breath away, leaving her momentarily speechless. These moments of vulnerability created a delicate balance between them, a fragile equilibrium that neither dared to disrupt. Yet, even as they grew closer, external forces began to encroach upon their fragile sanctuary. Reports of increased activity among local factions reached them, whispers of bounties placed on outsiders and rumors of impending conflict. Alarina urged caution, suggesting they relocate to a safer location, but Cale resisted, unwilling to abandon the repairs on his ship. Their disagreement sparked a heated argument, the first true clash of wills since their reunion. "You think you can protect me?" Cale snapped, his frustration boiling over. "I've survived worse than whatever's out there." Alarina bristled at his defiance, her own temper flaring. "And I've lost too much to lose you again," she shot back, her voice trembling with emotion. The words hung between them, raw and unfiltered, exposing the depth of her feelings in a way she hadn't intended. Cale stared at her, his expression unreadable, before turning away abruptly and retreating into the shadows of the facility. The fallout from their argument lingered, casting a pall over their interactions. Alarina berated herself for losing control, for revealing too much too soon, while Cale wrestled with the implications of her declaration. Neither addressed the issue directly, instead retreating into a tense silence that underscored the fragility of their connection. Yet, even in the absence of words, their bond persisted, a stubborn thread refusing to snap despite the strain. As the days passed, the looming threat outside grew more pronounced. Scavenger ships began circling the area, their pilots scanning for easy targets. Cale doubled down on his efforts to complete the repairs, working tirelessly to ensure the freighter was ready for departure. Alarina assisted where she could, her earlier frustrations giving way to a shared sense of urgency. Together, they labored through sleepless nights, their movements synchronized in a dance born of necessity and unspoken understanding. Through it all, the question of what lay ahead loomed large. Would they part ways once the repairs were complete, each returning to their separate lives? Or would Cale allow himself to take a chance, to follow her back to Velora and explore the possibilities their connection offered? The uncertainty weighed heavily on both of them, a silent specter haunting their every interaction. Yet, even as the danger outside intensified, neither could deny the pull they felt toward one another, a magnetic force that defied logic and reason. In the final hours before their planned departure, the tension reached a breaking point. Cale stood at the edge of the facility's observation deck, gazing out at the swirling nebulae that painted the sky in hues of violet and crimson. Alarina approached cautiously, her footsteps muffled by the worn metal floor. She stopped a few paces behind him, hesitating before speaking. "We need to talk," she said softly, her voice carrying a note of finality. Cale turned slowly, his expression unreadable. "About what?" he asked, though the resignation in his tone suggested he already knew. Alarina took a deep breath, steeling herself for the conversation ahead. "About us," she replied, stepping closer. "About what happens next." Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. For a moment, Cale said nothing, his gaze drifting back to the horizon. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, tinged with a mixture of frustration and vulnerability. "You keep saying us, but there is no us. Not really. We're from different worlds, Alarina. Different lives." His words cut deep, but she refused to let them deter her. "That's not true," she countered, her voice firm despite the tremor beneath it. There's something between us, something real. You feel it too, don't you? Her question hung suspended, demanding an answer he wasn't sure he was ready to give. Cale hesitated, his jaw tightening as he wrestled with his thoughts. Even if there is, he said finally, it doesn't change the fact that I don't belong in your world. I'm not some prince in shining armor who can ride off into the sunset with you. I'm just me. The bitterness in his tone was unmistakable, yet beneath it lay a flicker of doubt, a crack in the armor he had built around himself. Alarina stepped closer, closing the distance between them until they were mere inches apart. I don't care about titles or expectations, she said fiercely, her eyes blazing with conviction. All I care about is you. Don't you see? You've always been the one who saw past the crown, past the facade. You saved me once, Cale, not just my life, but my soul. And now I want to save yours. Her declaration struck a chord, shaking loose the walls he had constructed over the years. For the first time, he allowed himself to consider the possibility, not just of returning to Velora, but of letting her in, of trusting her enough to share the weight he carried. Yet, even as the idea took root, doubt lingered, whispering warnings of the risks involved. Before either could say more, the sound of approaching engines shattered the moment. Both turned sharply, their instincts kicking in as they realized the scavengers had found them. Time was running out, and with it, the opportunity to resolve the tangled web of emotions binding them together. As they prepared to face the imminent threat, the question of their future remained unanswered, hanging precariously in the balance like a star on the verge of collapse. The roar of engines grew louder, reverberating through the metal walls of the facility as scavenger ships descended like vultures circling their prey. Alarina and Cale exchanged a glance, wordless yet charged with understanding. Whatever unresolved tension lingered between them was momentarily eclipsed by the urgency of survival. Without hesitation, they sprang into action, moving with a synchronicity born of days spent working side by side. Cale grabbed a plasma rifle from a nearby workbench, his movements swift and deliberate. We need to get to the ship, he said tersely, his voice cutting through the chaos. Alarina nodded, her shimmering form glowing faintly in the dim light as she activated an energy shield, a gift from Valoran technology that crackled to life around her. Together, they sprinted down the corridor, dodging debris and bursts of hostile fire as the scavengers breached the outer perimeter. The facility erupted into chaos, alarms blaring and sparks flying from damaged equipment. Cale led the way, his instincts honed by years of navigating danger. He fired precise shots at advancing scavengers, clearing a path for Alarina to follow. Despite the peril, there was an unspoken trust between them now, a realization that whatever doubts had plagued them before, they were united in this moment. Their bond, forged in shared vulnerability and mutual respect, became a lifeline amid the storm. As they reached the freighter's docking bay, Cale paused, scanning the area for threats. Go, he urged, gesturing toward the open hatch. But Alarina hesitated, her luminous eyes locking onto his. Not without you, she declared firmly, her voice unwavering despite the cacophony around them. For a split second, Cale felt something shift within him, a crack in the armor he had worn for so long. Her unwavering loyalty stirred emotions he had buried deep inside, forcing him to confront the truth. He didn't want to lose her again. With renewed determination, they boarded the ship together, sealing the hatch just as a barrage of enemy fire struck the hull. The freighter shuddered but held steady as Cale powered up the engines. Alarina took her place at the co-pilot's console, her fingers dancing across the controls with practiced ease. "Coordinates set," she announced, her tone calm despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Let's get out of here." The ship roared to life, lifting off the ground with a jolt. Outside, scavenger vessels swarmed like insects, firing relentlessly in pursuit. Cale maneuvered the freighter with expert precision, weaving through asteroid fields and narrow gaps in the terrain. Alarina assisted by deploying countermeasures, blinding flashes of light and electromagnetic pulses that disrupted their pursuer systems. It was a chaotic dance, one that tested their skills and resolve, but they worked seamlessly as a team. As they broke free of the drift's gravitational pull, the scavengers fell behind, their ships unable to match the speed of Cale's modified freighter. The immediate threat faded, leaving only the hum of the engines and the vast emptiness of space stretching before them. For a moment, neither spoke, each lost in thought as the weight of what had transpired settled over them. Finally, Cale broke the silence. "You could have left me back there," he said quietly, his gaze fixed on the stars ahead. Alarina turned to look at him, her expression softening. "I told you, I'm not walking away this time," she replied simply, her voice steady yet laced with emotion. "Not unless you tell me to." Cale exhaled sharply, running a hand through his disheveled hair. The question hung unspoken between them. What now? They were no longer bound by the immediacy of danger, and the choices before them loomed large. Returning to Velora meant stepping into a world where Cale felt he didn't belong, while staying adrift in the cosmos offered freedom but also isolation, a fate he had grown weary of enduring alone. "I don't know if I can be who you need me to be," Cale admitted after a long pause, his voice tinged with vulnerability. "I'm not some hero or savior. I'm just me." His words carried the weight of years spent doubting his worth, fearing connection, and bracing against rejection. Alarina reached out, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "You don't have to be anything other than who you are," she said softly, her gaze steady and unwavering. "That's enough, for me, it's always been enough." Her touch sent a ripple through him, breaking down the last remnants of resistance he had clung to. In her eyes, he saw not judgment or expectation, but acceptance, a rare and precious gift. For the first time in years, Cale allowed himself to imagine a future beyond survival, beyond solitude. Could he step into a world so different from his own? Could he let go of the fear that had kept him tethered to the past? As these questions swirled in his mind, Alarina leaned closer, her presence a quiet anchor in the uncertainty. "Whatever happens next," she murmured, "we'll face it together." Her words resonated deeply, igniting a spark of hope within him. Together, they would face it together. The idea, once foreign and daunting, now felt possible. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Cale nodded, a small but significant gesture of surrender. "Okay," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Let's see where this takes us." With that decision made, the freighter surged forward, its trajectory set for Velora. As they traveled through the stars, the distance between them seemed to shrink, not just physically, but emotionally. They talked openly, sharing dreams and fears, laughter and tears. Each conversation brought them closer, weaving threads of trust and understanding into the fabric of their bond. When they finally arrived at Velora, the sight of its luminous forests and crystalline oceans took Cale's breath away. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, a world brimming with beauty and wonder. Yet, more awe-inspiring than the landscape was the warmth with which Alarina's people welcomed him. Though wary at first, they soon recognized the depth of her affection for him and embraced him as part of their queen's story. In time, Cale found his place among them, not as an outsider looking in, but as someone who brought a unique perspective to their society. He became a bridge between worlds, using his resourcefulness and ingenuity to forge alliances and solve problems. And Alarina, for her part, rediscovered the humanity she had feared losing, finding joy and fulfillment in their partnership. Their journey was far from perfect. Challenges arose, misunderstandings flared, and moments of doubt still surfaced. But through it all, they faced each obstacle side by side, drawing strength from the love that had grown between them. What began as a debt repaid evolved into something far greater, a testament to the power of connection, resilience, and the courage to embrace the unknown. And so, under twin suns that painted the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Alarina and Cale stood together, gazing out at the horizon. The road ahead remained uncertain, but they no longer feared it. For in each other, they had found not just salvation, but home.